if you want to save money on insurance, check out Lemonade. They have pet insurance, life insurance, homeowners insurance, renters insurance, and soon they'll have car insurance. Go to metkevin.com/lemonade because this video is brought to you by metkevin.com/lemonade. Well, folks, yesterday I did a full breakdown of the infrastructure package with what's included in the hard package, what's included in the soft package, stimulus for rich people, stimulus for not rich people, and wow, the lobbying, infighting that's happening, all of the nonsense, Congress being gone until the 13th, then supposedly coming back for 3 days to only go on vacation again until the 20th, and somehow between the 20th and the end of the month, getting the debt ceiling negotiation done, dealing with the Texas abortion crisis in the Democrats' point of view, which is what Nancy Pelosi is saying. She now wants to vote on the Texas abortion bill in the House of Representatives to codify Roe v. Wade, at the same time as dealing with 2 infrastructure packages, all somehow magically between September 20th and the end of September, which is September 30th. I don't really see all of that happening, but folks, we got another wrench in the gears. This wrench has been around before. In fact, there are 2 wrenches. Senator Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have both come out and suggested they will vote against the $3.5 trillion package. Senator Sinema suggests she is anti-spending another $3.5 trillion. And Senator Joe Manchin says the same thing, citing concerns in a Wall Street Journal opinion editorial or opinion piece, suggesting he is concerned over runaway inflation as the reason for not supporting the bill. This may force the Biden administration and congressional leaders to tone back and reduce spending on the overall plan completely, which might also call for changes then on salt tax deductions and other things like the 1031 exchange changes, real estate changes, changes to capital gains taxes, you name it. Manchin seemed to indicate that he would be open to supporting a smaller-sized social infrastructure bill that would only contain, quote, what America can afford and needs to spend. Now, he wasn't specific about that, but House Budget Chair John Yarmuth has argued that the U.S. has the capacity to spend a lot of money on domestic priorities, and that we can, quite frankly, quote, spend whatever we need to spend in the interest of serving American people. Yarmuth says that inflation fears are, quote, most likely transitory, which is a phrase that he likely got from Jerome Powell, who has regularly cited that the inflation we're seeing is transitory, which, in fairness to Jerome Powell, we have seen inflation propped up by spikes in prices for airline travel, lodging, used cars, and women's dresses. And then we have seen those 4 things begin to decline. However, now we're seeing rent prices start bumping up and potentially wages start bumping up. So we'll see, is inflation actually going to be transitory, or is inflation going to stick around larger and longer than expected? Yarmuth suggests that, hey, well, lumber prices fell, used car prices have fallen 2 months in a row now. Why bother worrying about inflation? And the reality is, we should print more money and make sure we spend and invest in Americans. But regardless of these sort of public debates, it's kind of interesting to note that there was a leaked phone call between Exxon lobbyist Keith McCoy saying that Joe Manchin is somebody he talks to every week. McCoy bragged to the interviewer, saying he calls Joe Manchin from West Virginia a kingmaker and discussed, quote, how on the Democratic side we look for the moderates on these issues in their efforts to stop policies that could hurt the company's business. This has led many to speculate the reason for Joe Manchin's opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal and his motivations to potentially block infrastructure packages, which he is obviously a crucial vote. You got to have 50 votes in the Senate. Not going to get Republican support. Doesn't look like that's even remotely a possibility at the moment. And you've got the problem of Joe Manchin in addition to Senator Sinema. Now, it's also worth taking a look at Joe Manchin's opinion piece here. Was published today in the Wall Street Journal, and he mentions that the nation faces an unprecedented array of challenges and will inevitably encounter additional crises in the future. Yet, overarchingly, Joe Manchin says an overheating economy has proposed a costly inflation tax on every middle and working class American. This is the argument that consumer debt becomes harder to pay off, and the cost of just getting by is much more expensive every single day as inflation rises, whereas inflation actually benefits those who own real estate and stocks, as their debt becomes easier to pay off, but it becomes something that essentially props up the valuations of their assets, making rich wealthier. So rich get more expensive assets, which make them wealthier. less expensive debts because they make more money or have more wealth to service those debts more easily. Whereas people with consumer debt don't have any assets that go up in value. They just have debt that is now harder to pay off because they're not necessarily making more money, and they're not able to keep more money because they're spending more money on more expensive groceries, rent, or other things. So Joe Manchin is not wrong about the existence of an inflation tax if indeed we do end up with long-run persistent inflation. And that's the big key, is are we going to see persistent inflation? Joe Manchin says those who believe such concerns are overstated should ask themselves, what do we do if the pandemic gets worse under the next viral mutation? What do we do if there's a financial crisis like the one that led to the Great Recession, or face a terrorist attack? This is actually something else that Joe Manchin has highlighted, is that instability in Afghanistan has led to his reluctance to spend $3.5 trillion now, that we should reserve this $3.5 trillion so that if there's another crisis that comes up, we are prepared. Therefore, he goes on to say, instead of rushing to spend trillions of dollars on new government programs and additional stimulus funding, Congress should hit a strategic pause on the budget reconciliation legislation. That Congress should hit a strategic pause on the budget reconciliation legislation. He says a pause is warranted because it will provide more clarity on the trajectory of the pandemic, and it will also determine whether inflation is transitory or not. And this is actually, quite frankly, true. I personally believe that inflation will inflect downward in the next 3 months, quite substantially, in fact. And if that occurs, perhaps then Joe Manchin would be more open to passing this sort of stimulus package towards the end of the year rather than here in September. Joe Manchin is a very important vote here. Another reason to pause, he says, we must allow for complete reporting and analysis of the implications of a multi-trillion-dollar bill, which will have implications for this generation and the next. He goes on to say that we shouldn't come up with a $3.5 trillion figure and then reverse engineer how to spend it. He says instead, we should focus on the urgent problems that we have. And that's why we are passing the $1 trillion package, and then we can figure out what else we need to do. Now, Joe Manchin's piece is quite long here. You could read the entire piece on the Wall Street Journal. It is entitled, Why I Won't Support Spending Another $3.5 trillion, and outlines a lot of the priorities that we just talked about in this video. So, we've got a big debate coming up in the next few weeks, and this Texas abortion law, which I, without taking a stance on Roe v. Wade, because that is a big debate topic, without taking a stance on abortion, I broke down everything that is in the Texas law and how it actually creates bounty hunter attorneys. It's quite fascinating. If you have not seen that video yet, make sure to check that video out. It'll be linked up here somewhere. And folks, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.